Julio Rodriguez captured the hearts of baseball fans in Washington State and around the world as a rookie in 2022. And guess what? He's going to be ours for a very, very long time. We're going to look back on Julio's first campaign at the major league level and tell you why this is only the beginning for Seattle's budding superstar. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Wednesday, October 26, 2022. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On the show today, we'll be starting our player reviews for the 2022 season with none other than Julio Rodriguez. We'll tell you what we saw this year from Julio, what surprised us, what didn't, and what the future holds for the Mariners star outfielder, and a whole lot more. And Colby, it was not that long ago that you and I were on this podcast before the season talking about, how the top prospects in the world that actually boom right out of the gate are the exception to the rule. They are not the standard. The Ronald Acuñas of the world, the Juan Sotos of the world, the Fernando Tatises, etc. And that it was, unfair to set those kinds of expectations on Julio to be a superstar right out of the gate. No matter how exciting he was coming up through the ranks and all the exciting things that we had heard from Jerry Dipoto and Scott Service and Andy McKay and the Mariners organization as a whole about Julio. And it certainly looked like, that was going to be the case, that he was going to have a rough time in the major leagues to adjust to major league pitching right away. The month of April was an absolute disaster for him. And of course, coming off of the year that Jared Kelenic had just had in 2021, it was like, okay, Mariners fans just think that they can't have nice things, right? We can't have that superstar player right out of the gate, a young 21-year-old who just takes the league by storm. But once the calendar flipped to May, Colby, things changed. Julio became that superstar player and helped lead the Mariners to their first playoff berth in 21 years. And I'll just start out by asking you this. What was the most impressive thing to you from Julio's rookie campaign as a 21-year-old?
It's probably that he didn't let the rough first month sink his season. We've seen young guys come up and they struggle a little bit, and then the doubt starts to creep in and they start pressing. And I mean, it's pretty easy to write that script for Jared Kelenic himself. So, and Julio, it wasn't just that he wasn't getting hits. He was running into a ton of bad luck. Home plate umpires seemed like it was their job to ring up Julio Rodriguez on any pitch that was within 6 inches of the strike zone. And that was frustrating, and it's extremely frustrating for a 21-year-old who really believes in his abilities and his skills, and he knows that he's better than that. And it just never really fazed him. We never saw it. He went out of his way to, tell people that he wasn't going to react. He wasn't going to, get mad. That's just not who he is. He's I'll let Scott handle that. Like, that's just not, that's just not me. And, he just stuck with it. He grinded out at bats after that. And it just kind of clicked on May 1st. I think that was the Sandy Alcantara game. He had his first career home run, and it was all off from there. So if you really think about it, Julio essentially didn't really add much, talent or much production in the month of April. And then in the second half, he ended up missing about 3 weeks of action from injury. So really for the first, there was about 6 weeks where the Mariners weren't getting anything from Julio. And Julio still ended up being their best player by like a mile. So it's all very impressive that Julio, kind of went through the little slump there at the beginning of the year. But then after that, small slumps here and there, but never anything that got to the point where we were looking at Julio and going like, yeah, he needs to change that. He always seemed to be able to make the adjustment when necessary, and it just seems like he rarely made the same mistake twice. He would make adjustments to the swing in game and per at bat, and that kind of ability is pretty rare, especially for a 21-year-old who has like 1,000 plate appearances in the minors total. It was just
Mhm.
really impressive to see just kind of process his first go around in the majors, and deal with the struggles. It bodes very well for his future as the face of Major League Baseball. If we're being
Mhm.
honest.
And you saw glimpses of it in that rough first month as well. I go back to, what was it, the first or second game of the year when he had that big double that helped them go on to beat the Twins late in that game.
Mm-hmm.
I
It
think that
was
was game
game
two,
one.
or was that game one?
It's game one. They won 2-1. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So they, so it was moments like that where you could see, like, all right, this kid is special. It's just not all coming together for him. And of course, there was the string of bad calls against him, all of that. Overall, in the month of April, 205, 284, 260 with a 61 WRC plus. And then from that point forward, from May 1st to the end of the regular season, /297, 355, 550, a 550 slugging percentage, 161 WRC plus. He had 21 doubles, 3 triples, 28 home runs, 69 nice RBI, and 16 stolen bases. He was 16 of 23 in steal attempts. But this even goes back further beyond before the struggles in the first month of the season. It was Julio's story really starts in spring training, with the spring training that he had, where he basically forced the Mariners' hand. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. When he did have his struggles in the first month of the season, was there at any point were you considering, and by the way, we have to note that the Mariners didn't really have another clear-cut option in center field at the time, but was there any point in time where you thought they should maybe send this guy down to AAA?
No,
Yeah.
not really. You could just see the process was working. He's a handful of bad calls away from putting up a totally respectable month of April as a 21-year-old. And the defense never suffered. It was one of those questions we had. Can Julio play center field? It feels like they're trying to, stick a right fielder in center field again. And the defense was just really solid from day one. The base running was incredible. So even though he wasn't really hitting, up to his potential early on, everything else was there, and the exit velocity numbers were great. There were times where you're like, okay, Julio, you're becoming incredibly predictable to pitch to. You're going to chase that slider outside, but he stopped doing it. He made that adjustment, and so no, every time you would start to think like, oh, maybe the league's figured Julio out, Julio would adjust and he would change things, and he would make it work. And he always brought value on the bases and in the field. So there was never any reason, even in the month of April, Julio was still probably the Mariners' third best player. Like he was just, you could just see that things were going to turn around for him pretty early on. And it certainly was paid off. But no, there was never really a time where you're like, boy, he just looks lost. He never looked lost.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, he'd go through some rough patches, but there are times when we've seen it with Kelnick, we've seen it where Trammell, where you're just like, these guys don't have a chance. Like they have no shot of hitting this pitching. Never saw that with Julio. It never looked like he was in over his head.
So overall for Julio, he slashes 284, 345, 509 with a 146 WRC plus. He was worth 5.4 F4 as a 21-year-old rookie, and is likely well on his way to being the American League Rookie of the Year, the Mariners' second American League Rookie of the Year in the last 3 seasons. And then in the postseason, slash 217, 357, 435 with a 125 WRC plus. And like you said on yesterday's episode, if he didn't sustain those injuries that he did, he was easily getting to the 30-30 club. He ended up with 25 steals, 28 home runs. he was on his way, and I mean, he still did some things that no one has really ever done in Major League Baseball history, but he was well on his way to doing even more of that, to reaching heights that no rookie has ever gone. It was an incredible season for him. We're going to talk more about his season and talk about what surprised us, what didn't, all that good stuff in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Simply Safe Home Security. As everyone knows, athletes rise and fall in the ranks, but when it comes to saving money, Simply Safe always stays on top. And right now, you can save big with Simply Safe Home Security. They're giving listeners 40% off their advanced security system. Simply Safe was also just named the best home security of 2022 by U.S. News. I use it. I love it. You'll love it too, because at Simply Safe, your safety is the only thing that matters. With 24/7 professional monitoring, when a threat is detected, Simply Safe's monitoring professionals promptly contact you and dispatch first responders to your home, even if you're away or unable to respond. 24/7 professional monitoring costs just under $1 a day. That's less than half the cost of ADT's traditional professional installed plans. Simply Safe blankets your home with protection with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door, HD security cameras for inside and outside your home, smarter ways to detect motion that only alert you when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that instantly detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. Don't miss this chance to save big when you protect your home with the best. Get 40% off your order when you visit simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb today. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes. That's simplysafe.com/lockedonmlb. Go today. There's no safe like Simply Safe. You're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. I want to talk about the, first, a reminder that we are talking about Julio Rodriguez all episode long as we begin our 2022 player reviews. But I want to next go to the moment that Julio solidified himself, or established himself rather, as a superstar in Major League Baseball. That was the home run derby, which we haven't talked about a lot. You know, when we're doing our team awards over the past few episodes, we did a best moment award, and we acknowledged the home run derby, but we didn't get too much into that. But I think that was truly the moment, under the lights in LA at Dodger Stadium, in Hollywood, in front of tons of celebrities, and we saw the response from celebrities and other superstars in other leagues like Stephen Curry tweeting at Julio, etc. That performance that Julio had in the home run derby, which he should have won, by the way. The formatting of the home run derby is stupid. He outperformed Juan Soto throughout that entire derby. Just because he lost in a single round to Soto shouldn't matter. He should have won the derby. But what he was able to do that night in LA was something that only a few players have done. And we've seen what the home run derby can do for players' stock, and how it can, even for players that are not necessarily top 20, top 30-ish, that it can still turn them into household names. And Julio Rodriguez that night became a household name. You saw the same, right?
No. Yeah, I think, Julio is always going to end up being a superstar and a face of the league type of player, not just the face of a franchise type of player. But I feel like the Derby kind of jump started his like national superstar type of persona, because like I said, at that point, Mariner fans knew how good he was. Like the diehards of just Major League Baseball in general knew how good Julio was at that point.
Plus, wasn't that right after the obviously that was right after the 14-game winning streak, but wasn't that right after he hit that huge home run off of Jose Leclerc, the grand slam off of Jose Leclerc and all that? Like,
it's a couple days after that, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's when the casual fan was like, yeah, this isn't just hype. There's obviously there's talent here. I can look at the stats and tell how good he is. He's an all-star. Obviously, he's an all-star, and he's not named Albert Pujols or Miguel Cabrera. So obviously he's a very good baseball player. So yeah, I think they knew about that. But I think after the home run derby, people knew Julio Rodriguez. Like,
yeah,
that is a name now that you can say to a casual baseball fan, and they know who he is. Like, You don't.
He's on a first name basis now, right? It's Julio. Like no one says Rodriguez. No one like even if you're watching a national broadcast and they're just announcing him, it's Julio. It's not Julio Rodriguez. It's not Rodriguez. It's Julio.
Right. And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's different, right? Than like go ask a casual baseball fan like who Brandon Lau is, right? Lau's a really good player. How many people do you think know who Brandon Lau is? Just casual base, like they don't watch it every day.
Right.
30%, 40% maybe. I might be generous. Now go say the word Julio in front of a casual baseball fan. They're going, oh yeah, the kid in Seattle. Yeah. Julio's that type of guy. He's always had that personality. And I think, the personality really started to shine too. You saw the smile, you saw the joy, you saw the graciousness after he, basically got screwed out of the winning that thing. And he talked about the excitement of doing it again. Like Julio Rodriguez, I think on that night, officially started to stake his claim as the face of Major League Baseball, which is kind of good because, right now Major League Baseball doesn't necessarily have one, right? I mean, it should be Mike Trout. Trout doesn't want it. It's probably Shohei Ohtani. If anybody is going to lay claim to that, it's probably Ohtani. But Julio is right there. It's not really Acuna. It's not really, Tatis, certainly not anymore. Major League Baseball doesn't really have these young, budding superstars. Or here's the thing, they actually do have them. They're just really bad at marketing them. The beauty of Julio is that Julio markets himself and he doesn't even have to try, right? There's nothing fake about Julio's, his, what he puts out there. There's nothing fake about that. It's extreme. He's an extremely marketable guy. He's got a great smile. He's young. He's energetic. Pretty good looking dude. Great swing. Hits home runs, steal bases, plays defense, hustles. Literally everything that anybody likes about baseball, Julio Rodriguez has it. So he's incredibly marketable. And the last time baseball had a guy this marketable, like personality wise and all that stuff, was probably Griffey in the 90s. So it's funny how that's worked out. Both end up playing center field for Seattle. But Julio is that guy. He is him, right? And Major League Baseball should be doing everything in its power to push Julio front and center because he is the type of guy who gets people who don't care about baseball to watch baseball, to become baseball fans. He just has that personality.
I remember back when the Mariners were hosting the Blue Jays for that 4-game series in, July? And I got invited onto the Blue Jays pregame show on the radio, and they asked me to describe Julio. And the first thing that I said, and this is the thing that I will always say if anyone asks me to describe Julio Rodriguez, is that he loves baseball. Mm-hmm. And if he loves baseball, you should love baseball when you're watching him. Because, he's fun personified. He's everything you want baseball to be. Like, he champions all of that. You talked about how, he hustles, he plays defense, he hits home runs, he steals bases, all that. Everything that is fun about baseball and marketable about baseball, Julio does it. He embodies that. And that's the beauty of Julio Rodriguez. What to you was your favorite moment for Julio this year? Was it the Derby? Was it something else?
I think kind of the image that a lot of people have of Julio is going to be the Derby, but it's going to sound cliche, but after Seawald and Castillo blow it against Atlanta, they're down 1. Julio knows he's coming up. Julio's running off the field and he's smiling. He's laughing. He's like, you guys gave me an opportunity to be a hero and I'm going to take advantage of it. And it's not the only time Julio's done that. Julio has risen to the occasion multiple times. Of course, there was that game, and then the game against Houston, comes to mind where Seattle takes this lead late. And then Neris is a petulant little child and he throws at Ty France and, there's the little dust up and the Astros pretend like they're tough and they're going to go out and they're going to beat the, out of the Mariners. And then Julio picks up Hector Neris, walks him away from the, the scuffle or whatever, then gets into the batter's box against him and hits the 2-run home run to put that game out of reach. Like Julio just seems to have a sense for that moment. And he was pretty good in the playoffs too. He didn't hit the big home run or anything like that in the playoffs, but really his numbers, which were pretty good, those pretty good numbers in the playoffs, they're even better if you take out that last game where he went 1-for-7. like,
Yeah.
like he was a really good player in the playoffs. He just seems to have that when the game is at its like most frustrating, he just has this just coolness about him, and I think that was pretty much personified in the Atlanta game where he's coming off the field laughing almost like he knows what's about, like oh,
Well,
I'm about to
and
ruin
we
your
saw
day.
that, and we even saw that more, and it didn't really come through in that way where he actually, hit the big home run or what have you. But they fall down, or the Robbie Ray gives up the 3-run home run to Yordan Alvarez, and Julio's coming off the field, smiling, whatever, like doesn't faze him. Right? They're down 2-0. He's going out and chatting with Astros players and Dusty Baker before, the day before the game in Seattle. Like that's, I don't mean to be a 12 here, but you know how Russell Wilson always talks about how,
Who?
you gotta have amnesia. Yeah, exactly. But you gotta have amnesia. You gotta just move on. Take it one play at a time. Julio actually does that and doesn't need to tell you that he's doing that. That's who Julio Rodriguez is.
Julio actually lives in the gym, but he doesn't feel the need to post his workouts on Instagram.
Right. And he still will a little bit. And
Right, but it's not like, look at me. It's not like the classic, like, oh, look how hard I'm working over here, everybody. Like, oh, I went and visited kids at a children's hospital. I better bring my camera crew like a normal person does. I do that not for the publicity, no, because I really want to do it. Right. Julio's not that guy. Julio does these things and he doesn't need recognition for them. He puts in the work. Then that's part of who Julio is. And he's already been rewarded and hopefully it's the lifetime contract. Most of us have said it essentially is. It'd be devastating at this point to see Julio, play another game or play a game in his career for a team not the Seattle Mariners. That's how quickly he's kind of endeared himself to Mariner fans. And yeah, it's funny they do the playoff intro and all that stuff at the game. Loudest cheer without question is for Julio. Like people in Seattle, they love Julio. And he's ours, but also Major League Baseball is going to make us share him with other people, but never forget that he is ours. Like he is a Seattle Mariner, and it's just cool because again, the Mariners haven't had a player like that. Like if you want to be generous and say Ichiro was that type of guy, like, okay, fine, but it's just different. Julio, didn't play in Japan. He didn't have this huge like following coming with him from across the seas or anything like that. He was just a 21-year-old kid who just popped up and everybody knew about the talent and he just, it's like he rolled out of bed and was an all-star from day one. Like it's just insane talent for Julio and you get to see him play for your favorite team. But yeah, I do think, obviously, the bat speed and the arm and the power and the speed and the size, like all the things you can physically see are really important. And that's what makes him a great player. But it's all the stuff that we don't see and we don't know that much about because Julio just does it. He doesn't do it because, it'll help him like his brand. He doesn't care about that. Julio does them because he wants to be good at baseball. He wants to be the best he can possibly be. And that's the kind of guy that you build around. And that's the guy that you point to and say, that's what a Seattle Mariner is. And
when
so,
you look at him, for me at least, I look at him and I go, that guy's bringing a championship here.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know, man. Julio is different because, it's the, like, he's too good to be true, but he is like, no, that's not an act, right? That is who Julio is. And there's just, you can't find anybody to say a bad word about him. He's never had a bad interaction with anybody. It seems like, he looks over his shoulder at Ty, and Ty's convinced that they're in love. Like it's
we had a moment. We had eye contact, man.
And yet you let safety cones keep you from getting down on that field after the comeback win. So
I had the duty of recording a show for my wonderful
that's
audience.
the excuse.
Yes,
that's why it took 4 hours to get home. Interesting.
That was the night before. That was the night before, Colby.
Whatever,
I was responsible on game 2, which is really weird. The way that I celebrated those 2 games, it should have been flipped. It should have been flipped, the celebrations for those games.
You'd think, but
nevertheless.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to ask you. I mean, the answer to this could be just as simple as the fact that he was really, really good right out of the gate. But what surprised you from Julio's season this year, if anything?
Probably how fast he was to make adjustments. It was weird because we go back to the April, right? And he was getting rung up on, I don't even want to call them borderline pitches because they weren't near the strike zone, and he was getting rung up on them. Never chased. He would not chase those pitches. I think he had like 15 bad calls go against him, and he never started to chase those pitches off the plate as a result. Like, it would have been so easy for him. Like, I got to hit, I got to get hits. So if I got to go, a couple inches outside of what I can do and just try and hit that, then I'm going to. Julio didn't. He never did that. He never changed. But when pitchers started to throw a ton of sliders outside, Julio struggled for a little bit on that, and then he made the adjustment. Then he started to drive the ball to right field, and then pitchers would make their adjustment. Julio would struggle for a couple days, and then he would make his adjustment. So it just, the fact that he never had a prolonged issue. Now, I mean, there are still things he can clean up. He still does struggle with some spin off the outside corner. That's certainly something he can clean up. But you just, early on, he was getting just killed by these bad calls. He would not expand his zone, never even considered it. And then once that problem kind of started to solve itself, new problems popped up, the slider away. And then Julio, oh, well, no problem. I'll just flip that into right field, half a dozen times in a week. And eventually you'll have to change the way you pitch me. And then, okay, let's go, hard up in the zone. And Julio sent a couple of those things 450 feet out. And they're like, okay, now we have to change it. And every time, Major League Baseball would come up with a counter punch, Julio would end up, eventually countering that counter punch. It's so impressive from a 21-year-old that we didn't see one way that pitchers could consistently pitch Julio that would always get him out. Julio would make an adjustment. And like I said, there are still some things to work on. Like, he still has to work on that spin on the outside. That's still your best shot to get Julio out. But if you miss by 2 inches on the plate, he's going to hit it very hard, and you're going to be in big trouble. So there's still things he can work on, but just the overall ability to just, roll with the punches early and then punch back, counter punch, and then wait for the counter and counter back. Like, he's a very mature hitter at the plate. I think that's what surprised me the most. Yeah, the strikeouts could go down a little bit, but the game plan, very few wasted at bats from Julio in his rookie year. Some, but not a lot.
Yeah. And going off of the talk about the adjustments, I'm pretty excited to see his next matchup against Lance McCullers Jr. I don't think that McCullers is going to have as much success as he did in Game 3 of the year. I guess, the next time those two meet.
Those are some rough at bats, but Julio, if he saw him again, like if it was a 7-game series and Julio saw him in Game 7 or whatever, I'm pretty sure that the matchup would have gone a little different.
Yeah, and now with an off season's worth of work, I think Julio is going to be a more refined hitter in 2023. We'll get into that in just a moment. But for me, the biggest surprise for me with Julio was both the defense and the speed and how he was able to impact the game on the base pass, because he was never a huge base stealer in the minor leagues. I think the most stolen bases he had down in the minors was 16. So for him to come up and legitimately threaten to be a 30-30 guy as a 21-year-old rookie, I don't think anyone could have expected that. And on top of that, to be not just a serviceable center fielder, but an actual legitimate center field defender who was, +7 and outs above average this year. You and I thought he was a corner outfield guy, and that eventually he would DH or what have you, kind of have a similar career path as Miguel Cabrera, in terms of eventually ending up at DH or first base or whatever. And that's likely what ends up happening for him down the road. But you and I never thought that he was going to be that he was actually going to be a legitimate center field option. And that didn't really pop into our minds until Jerry Dipoto started talking about it in the offseason. And even when he started talking about it, I remember you and I on the show being like, I don't know about that. That seems a little weird. That seems like you're sacrificing defense there. That seems like you're getting a little too cute with it with Julio in center field. Turns out Jerry Dipoto and crew were right. Right. And also, I think the most or the highest grade that a lot of outlets put on Julio's speed was about 60, 55, 60. I even saw some 50s at one point. But then Jerry Dipoto came out in spring training and was like, Julio's like a legit 70, 75 grade runner.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, no way. But then, season starts and he's swiping all these bags and he's playing a good center field. And it's like, okay, yeah, they were right.
Yeah, there's a little Michael Jordan to Julio. Like, yeah, I saw those reports and I took that personally. And Julio did. He saw the reports. I remember, pretty early on, I think he was 17, 18 at the time. Pipeline had a 50 grade on his speed. And Julio took that really personally. And he went out and he stole like 12 bases in like 35 games or something crazy like that. And he went to work on the speed and then, oh no, he'll be a pretty good defender in right field, but you can't play him up the middle. He's too big. He doesn't have that quickness. And Julio was just like, oh, good. Something else I can prove people wrong on. And he went out and he did it. And Julio's defense was a big plus. And I think we could start to see the writing on the wall after the lockout. They really didn't have any interest in bringing in a center fielder. And because of their lack of really bringing in any outfielder, aside from Jesse Winker, who not really an outfielder, more of a DH. But I think at that point when they were like, yeah, this is the squad we're going to roll with, I think you and I were both in agreement. Like, okay, they're very serious about Julio. Not only making the opening day roster, but being the center fielder, because at that point the writing's on the wall, and he was really good. He was, like I said, I don't want to oversell his defense. He wasn't a healthy Byron Buxton or anything like that, but he was very good. He was never an issue defensively in center field, and even made some huge plays like the sliding catch to rob the double of, I think it was Altuve who hit that one. And in the 16th inning, 17th inning, the last game of the year, and that's just speed and agility and first step quickness. That's just tell Julio he can't do something. I dare you.
Well, and that's kind of got to give you some confidence that he might be able to add even more things to his game, because he's still really young. He's going to be 22 next year. Like, he's really, really young. A lot of guys that are 22 years old are still playing college ball, or they're really just beginning their minor league career. Like, dude's already performing at a really, really, really high level at an age that people just don't. Normal human beings, normal baseball players just don't. So last question for you.
Sorry, real fast.
Okay.
One more thing on the whole, tell Julio he can't do something. The guy taught himself English as a 15-year-old.
That's awesome.
He taught him. Why did he teach himself English? Because he wanted to be able to do interviews in English when he was playing in the big leagues. That was his thought process as a 15-year-old kid. Was like, oh, obviously I'm going to be in the big leagues. I want to be able to do these interviews in English too.
Mm-hmm.
So he went out and he bought tapes, like literal tapes, on how to speak English, and he taught himself how to do it.
Yep.
He
speaks great English, Kevin Mather.
Yes,
great English.
Yeah, better than anything Kevin Mather's ever done in his life. So, yeah, it's just like it's a cliche, and I don't like using it, but kids just built different. Like, that's not a common thing that people do.
Yeah. All right, last question. Very simple question. Did Julio do enough this year to set himself up for an MVP run next year?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Especially if the Mariners make a deep playoff run. The Mariners challenge for the division next year for any serious length of time. Like this year, they never really challenged for it. But if they're neck and neck with the Astros next year and Julio's having a good year, yeah, he'll definitely get some votes. And I'd be shocked if Julio didn't win at least one in his career. He's just that type of guy. And honestly, you could tell me he's going to win 5 or 6, and I'd be like, okay, like maybe I could see it. So, yeah, I think he starts the year on the watch list. Not that they have those, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think when Bet Online sends us their odds for AL MVP, he's going to be pretty high on that list. All right, well, that's going to do it for our show. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you to Julio Rodriguez for being awesome at baseball. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez. That's DANEGNZLZ. And Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now, for your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast, featuring the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts, just like us. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.